Good morning, Sarah Olayuk. It's a pleasure to have you on this platform. I am Albert Barume. I'm the chair of the United Nations Expert Mechanism on the Right of Indigenous Peoples. And thank you for coming to this chat. I would like you to present yourself more. Tell us more about yourself before we get on with this conversation. Please.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this conversation. Sarah Lynn Jancke. I am from the Kitikmeot region in Nunavut, and Nunavut is the newest territory in Canada. From Cambridge Bay, that's my home community, Iqaluktutiaq, the place of many fish, and I work in many levels of change, from the grassroots in our municipal council to territorial Embrace Life Council, which is our suicide prevention council, and nationally as vice president of our National Inuit Youth Council.
Sarah, I understand you were actually the first Inuit co-chair of the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus. How did you get involved in all of that?
So during the preparatory meeting in Norway for the World Conference on Indigenous People, I was asked to go as a part of our National Inuit Youth Council. I had no idea what to expect, and I got on the ground and I followed our Arctic region around, and they had mentioned that there's youth meeting. So I ran over to the youth and started listening to the conversations. And I was really lucky to be mentored from the Sami, because they had never had Inuit engaged in the Arctic caucus. So since then, I would follow along, and I became a focal point a couple years later. And last year, I was really proud to be nominated and elected as the first Inuk co-chair for the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus.
That's an incredible story. It's really an incredible story. Sarah, 10 years ago, a process that took over 20 years reached a peak here in the United Nations. The United Nations Declaration on the Right of Indigenous People was finally adopted. What does the 10 years represent for the Indigenous youth, in your view?
In my perspective, in the 10 years, I think that we're doing a really good job for Indigenous youth to reach out and engage. And it's not a perfect process, because I think for a lot of youth in the communities, we know there's issues, and it's hard to see outside of small rural Indigenous communities. So we're building we're creating a face for the United Nations, because when I learned about the United Nations in grade 10, which was probably about 13 years ago, there was a book in our a page in our social studies book, and the only picture I remember is the flags, and it meant nothing to me back then. Or I didn't know what it meant to me. And we're doing a lot of work at the grassroots. There's a lot of Indigenous people who are now proud and working in revolutionary work, like the development of Nunavut. That all took many, many years. But we're creating a face in the UN, and we're inspiring Indigenous people, but also educating outside of Indigenous people on what we have the right for.
That's something that, the UN Declaration, it's something your parents, your grandparents worked very hard on and successfully managed to have it adopted by the UN. Do you think the passing of responsibility is being done as it should be? And do you feel the youth more and more realizing the responsibility behind the adoption and what the declaration should be doing in terms of it being implemented?
I think what I've felt and experienced in the past couple of years is that our Arctic leaders or our regional leaders really take the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus members under their wing. So when we're here and present, they mentor us, and I felt a gradual growth. So they're helping us to pass on the torch. And with the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus, it's a first exposure in a safe way that is meeting Indigenous youth where they're at. Because often we're just volunteers at the grassroots who are lucky to get here. That's our first exposure to the visionary work that's happening with the United Nations, and it helps us to connect and realize how that connects with our home.
Where's the home? Tell me, the declaration provides for extraordinary and very unique rights that were meant to redress historical injustices in access to rights and deprivations that prevailed in indigenous community. Tell me, how do you think the declaration is making change, and what kind of challenges are still persisting, particularly with regard to youth?
I think it's definitely making a change, but where the challenge lies is reaching people from outside of the United Nations, outside of attendees to the permanent forum, that are the member states know about it and the governments know about it, but how do we make this a living document for people in communities, and how do we instill that pride? And I think that's the first step, is building that pride for Indigenous people.
And what are the prevailing, the continuing challenges that the youth is still facing in those Indigenous communities, in your view?
The biggest challenge that I'm seeing, it's a whole societal challenge. But we have to build an identity for ourselves as Indigenous youth. We have ancestors who were born on the land, in total control of their lives and in total control of their laws, guided by the land and guided by their surroundings. And just in a couple generations, other cultures have been imposed on our grandparents or great-grandparents.
So you live in two worlds, basically.
Exactly. So what we have to do is not only take the beauty of our Indigenous culture and strengthen that, but we have to educate ourselves and prepare ourselves to be leaders in the new world. And it's a tough balance for many people. But the biggest thing, and what I've learned from our culture and every Indigenous culture, is everyone has a gift to share. And that's how people survive, was strengthening the gifts that you have, whether it's coming and speaking at the United Nations, or if you can hunt, or if you can help get water, or whatever you need to do. Everyone needs to find their place and feel proud of who they are.
And do you think the Indigenous youth is copying? That's quite too heavy to handle. It's a two world. You have the history, you have the culture, and you're facing the new life. Is that too much to handle for many Indigenous young people?
I think it's definitely too much to handle. The changes aren't coming as fast as we need them to. And as much as I am an optimistic visionary, I know the realities that many people are struggling at home alone. They're in their isolated communities and they're alone in a lost world. So we have also, people in our jobs, we have to share that reality, because people are suffering and they're surviving day by day, minute by minute, hour by hour. And how can we push them or support them so that they can thrive? Because our peoples, even though we had hard lives in some of the hardest places to live, we thrived. And how do we show them that they have the right to live a good life?
The expert mechanisms will be submitting a report to the Human Rights Council next July on the right of indigenous peoples to health. Because the council has requested us to look into that specific rights. And while we were doing that analysis, we came across a high rates of suicides and mental health issues facing indigenous youth particularly. Why do you think that those facts are prevailing still in indigenous communities?
I think that when you're working in an office, it's really easy to see the amazing things that we're doing on paper and the amazing work that we're doing. But we have to implement that. We have to implement that. And there are amazing programs out there run and designed by indigenous people that are making a difference. But it's only handfuls. It's only the luckiest people who are strong enough to get the 10 seats in a project in your community. And I think that we really have to be clear on the urgency, that we have to work together with indigenous people at the grassroots and in the communities to decide how they want to provide support for those people. And education, as an indigenous youth, learning about the history and understanding where the feelings are coming from. That is the biggest strength that we can give them, because no one's going to change it. We have to inspire individuals to make a change in themselves. It's not going to be the government. It's not going to be the UN. We have to build the connection all together so that at the end of the day, in their heart and in their soul and in their mind, they feel a sense of resiliency and pride so that they can grow stronger day by day.
As we move into the second decade of the declaration, because in my view it also coincides with the youth, the indigenous youth taking over. The statements that are coming from the room are simply showing that the youth is ready to take over, if it has already not taken over. And I want you to reflect on how do you see the declaration implementation moving in the next 10 years?
I think in the next 10 years, we have a couple streams of indigenous youth that are taking over. And there's a large amount of indigenous youth that have been immersed in the processes and are ready to move past the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus. But there's also the other side of it, where we need to play a role in educating not only indigenous youth, but indigenous people of all ages and all generations, in plain language that they can understand. Because it's very intimidating to say UNDRIP. We know what UNDRIP is when you come here.
That's true.
And if you don't know what it is, you can't feel it, you know. And if we share in plain language from our leaders, then it'll connect. Like we ask them, why have you been doing this for 20 years? Why have you been doing this for 40 years? What does it mean to you?
So you see in the next 10 years, the youth, Indigenous youth, focusing on disseminating the declaration. You feel like it is yet an instrument to be fully understood by the people in communities, the youth, Indigenous youth in communities?
I think there's a few different streams. Because I hope that organizations see the strength in the youth and offer support, because we really are an independent body of volunteers. A lot of us barely get funding to attend. I was very lucky to receive the voluntary fund this year, and that's the first year that I'm able to stay for the whole 2 weeks. But many youth are begging. They're in their home communities and begging for the opportunity to attend. And when they get here, some of them don't have places to stay. They don't have food. They don't have a lot. And I know a lot of youth that are self-funded as well. So I hope that we can secure funds so that more Indigenous people can take part, but also register.
Are you talking to the UN? So it just seems to be like you're talking to the United Nations. What would you like to see as a youth leader? Would you like the United Nations to focus on in terms of implementation of the declaration in the next coming years? As I can see you mentioning the contribution, making resources available, enabling Indigenous youth to participate. And what else do you see the United Nations being called upon to do in the next 10 years for the declaration to really become a reality for all the Indigenous youth that you represent?
I think that I wouldn't say calling out, but partnering. Because we have so many inspirational young people that have fought at the grassroots to come here with the GIYC.
We have more to offer.
Yeah, and if we can partner to reach out to communities and bring it to life and connect what's happening at the UN with our people, because it connects directly with what we're doing in our home communities and the programs and initiatives, but we need help to explain it. And I think when it's with the UN, it's a level of respect and a level of professionalism that it's hard to achieve just in your small towns without a lot of internet, or without even the setup brings a sense of pride and officiality that we can't get. But if we can do that together, then I think it'll inspire a lot of people.
Sarah, I like your concept of asking the UN not for charity, but for a partnership, because you feel Indigenous people have more to offer, and there is something, including for the UN, to gain in having the youth participating more in the United Nations system. And I was wondering whether, as an actor of the Global Caucus, you feel the youth movement as united and together and with the same capacity from different regions? What's your reflection on how should the youth come together, and whether there is some uneven capacity to engage in that partnership with the UN?
I think that we're building a lot of strong partnerships that will assist us. We have FAO helping us out. I won't talk about that too much, but that's an example of organizations that are seeing the strength of our people, our Indigenous youth, and asking us, how can we work together? And if we have more of that, just like inviting to the media zone, we're getting invited to a lot of great panels and discussions. So how can we continue these partnerships and showcase the strength and the unity that our Indigenous youth have? Because we have a lot of great ideas and we're very flexible, and that flexibility comes with our strong vision and connection with our Indigenous cultures, and that comes, we're a new generation with that freedom, with that freedom to feel it at its whole. And I don't even think we're the generation that has even fully felt the impacts yet. So I can't imagine what next generations will have.
Sarah, I'm going to have one of the last questions. Really, I want you to reflect on what you think. How do you see the youth engaging the 3 UN mechanisms on Indigenous peoples? As you know, the UN has 3 of them. This is one of them we are attending here, the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. It has a special rapporteur on the right of Indigenous people, and it has the UN expert mechanism on the right of Indigenous people that works mostly from Geneva. How do you see how do you see the youth engaging and making the most out of these 3 mechanisms?
Well, may I dare to say that having Indigenous youth directly involved in these mechanisms, officially involved in these mechanisms, in a leadership role, then that inspiration would just flow everywhere. Because I think right now we're at the point where once we're not a youth, where do we go? Do we wait until we're 50 years old with enough credentials to be recognized? Or do we create the spaces to mentor that and facilitate that learning hands-on? Because that's how we learn as Indigenous people. We take on the challenges, we jump right in, and we figure it out. So I'd like to see that change, and I hope. Well, we have a vision of that happening. Yeah, and we do it really well with the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus. We all reach consensus, and we all share and support that between regions.
And tell me more a little bit. How do you, when you come to a meeting like this, what happens after? How do you interact back or feedback into your community? Your own experience. How do you do that?
Well, there's a lot of engagement through social media. And that's why I'm really proud to see this new media zone with the live streaming, because there's a lot of people that can't make it. But there's also a lot of people that can be inspired by just
seeing people on a platform.
Yeah. So I think a lot of the engagement happens here when I'm on the ground, and then I try to share both sides of it, the real perspective. And then when we get home, it's a little bit harder to explain what's going on, but there are people who listen and they're ready and they fight to come. And just as an example, in Canada, we had a young woman come to the UN last year with their class. The program is called Nunavut. It's a training program for Inuit. So they brought a delegation here, and they came to the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus, and they listened and they participated. Well, she went home to Nunatsiavut, that's Labrador in Canada, and she fought all year. She said, I need to get young people here. And she has a whole delegation of 9 Inuit youth from Nunatsiavut here at the UN. She was able to pull that together. And she knew that they needed to be exposed to the strength of what's happening here. So there are those people we're reaching out, we're reaching those people. And I imagine it was the same way over the past 40 years, the past 20 years, that if you're exposed, the little bug is in your ear,
Yes.
and it doesn't leave. You know, you feel the pride, and you can't let it go.
And what are you taking back home from this session?
From this session right now?
Specifically, yes.
Well, I'm really proud, first of all, that it's live streamed, and I hope that my friends and my family and people that I work with can see what happens here. And then sharing the video after this is also key, not only for me because I'm in here, but these conversations need to be brought to life outside of the rooms and in the grassroots. And I hope that even if you don't understand what UNDRIP is, that you go and Google it.
That's true.
That you go to the UN website where you find, like, what a funny story is that.
But how accessible is let's say the online materials, the access to internet is in local communities?
It's slow, but it's accessible. The little books, though,
yeah,
the little UNDRIP books, those float around all over the world. I wish I had one to pop out, but if you see that around, pick it up and read the first page and skim through it a bit. And also the Indigenous Worlds book that comes out every year?
Right.
Those are around, but how do we get people looking in them? That's an amazing document, or amazing book that they could be using in school.
And how do you do that? Yeah.
I think talking about it, like when in Indigenous communities, there's so many flyers, there's so many posters, so many campaigns that are saying stop smoking or live a good life, or so until we make an effort to recognize that's there, it pops off the wall, because you walk by the wall, just like the side events, and it's overwhelming. You got to know what to look for. So I think if we talk about it more in a visual way, because a lot of people are not literate as well, and
that's another point.
We can't exclude them. And as beautiful as the photographs are or the designs are, we have to bring life to it. Then you could really appreciate the work that was put into developing.
I like your point about all those different posters that are present in Indigenous communities. Don't do this, or live like this, or telling people. And anything on the declaration could just be one of those. Mm-hmm. How do we make a specific space for the UNDRIP material, so it doesn't just somebody passing by in community doesn't think, okay, that's another flyer, that's another sort of poster telling us how should we. What's your? I like your point.
Well, I'll just use an example. There was one year, I think it was maybe 2012, that it was floating around, and I would pick it up, and I didn't quite know what it was, and I came to our office, and they said, "Oh, Sarah was probably interested in this, so she'll put it in her library." I never knew what it was, but then I started to get invited to the events. And then I looked and said, wow, this has been surrounding me. So I think through interactive models like this, and another way is planning to engage those regions. So hosting. So I can't imagine if a classroom said, okay, I'm going to tune in to this media zone, and then we're going to have a discussion after it.
Sarah, we are running out of time, and I'm going to ask you to just in 1 second say your last word. Knowing you are being live streamed, what would you say?
I'd just like to say that I hope that Indigenous youth and Indigenous people from all regions and all ages of the world feel pride in themselves and develop that sense of hope, because the pride that we have from our ancestors is the strongest strength that we can ever have, and we have to develop a vision for the future with that present. So I hope everyone takes the time to learn about themselves and find their gift and find what they have to offer to their community.
Thank you, Sarah. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.